Welcome here, everyone, to Automated Governance for FME Flow, Smarter Admin at Scale. I'm joined today by our four amazing team of presenters. I'll pass it off to each of them to introduce themselves. So getting started with Dylan.
Hey everyone, my name is Dylan Patterson. I'm a technical support specialist here at Safe Software, and I'm on the FME Flow team. I'll pass it off to Nia.
Hi everyone, I'm Nia Colebrook, and I'm also a technical support specialist with FME Flow on Dylan's team as well. I'll pass to Richard.
I'm also on Nia and Dylan's team. I'm the FME Flow support lead there. And Mark.
Hi, I am a pre-sales support specialist, and I'm here around for both Form and Flow.
Awesome. Thanks to all four of you. Now, if you do have any questions for our four presenters as we go along here, just a reminder to take advantage of that questions tab on the bottom right. We will have a little bit of dedicated time at the end to answer some questions live, and we should also be able to get to some as we go along here. The chat, keep letting us know where you're tuning in from or leave any comments there as we go. If you do have any audio or video issues whatsoever during the webinar, you can click that help button on the bottom left for 4 simple steps. The first one is just a simple page refresh, usually takes care of any glitches there. And lastly, the react button. We love to see how everyone is feeling about the content, engaging with it as we go along. It really fuels us and our presenting team. So please do use that. It's fun to see those. Great, everyone's already testing it out. And if you'd like to download the slides, there is a handy download button you'll see on the top right of the PDF there. Okay. So with that in mind, I will prompt our presenters if they can turn off their webcams just to save on some bandwidth for the remainder of the webinar here. And I will take us through a look at our agenda for today. So Naya is going to be taking us through an introduction to today's topic and best practices and tools for user management. From there, Mark will lead us through our system events segment, asking the question of what if FME Flow can manage itself? And then Richard's going to walk us through both visualizing relationships in FME Flow and job quality assurance, where you'll learn about measuring output quality and quantity. And then last but not least, Dylan will go through custom MCP integrations and summarize our webinar's key takeaways. And then we're going to leave you with some resources and next steps to help get started firsthand yourself on this topic following today's webinar. And then, as I mentioned a little bit ago, we will have that dedicated time at the end for some live questions. I will pass things over to Naya for our intro.
All right, thank you so much. So governance can be a complex topic, and it's important to be efficient with it to avoid common frustrations like missing critical system issues until it's too late, inconsistent user access, poorly documented or orphaned objects that are difficult to understand, and manual tasks that only ever seem to increase as the environment scales. This webinar is designed to provide you with different tools you can use to govern your FME Flow environment with confidence and without the manual burden. So again, the goal of this webinar is to kind of touch on how to manage your FME Flow environment more efficiently. And of course, we all know that FME Flow can automate data workflows, but FME Flow also has a variety of features that allow you to automate governing it as well. So over the course of this webinar, we're going to provide you with ideas for workspace and automation design to make monitoring and maintaining your FME Flow deployment a breeze. And this is an intermediate webinar, so I'm sure you're all familiar with the FME Enterprise Integration Platform as a whole, but I'll just do a brief recap here. Our webinar focuses on FME Flow, which can automate and create apps for workspaces created in FME form. And we also have FME Realize in the platform as well, which is our augmented reality option. Without further ado, let's dive into the meat of it here. So first, I'm going to talk about different strategies to make user management easier in FME Flow. I'll start by going through some best practices for user management, and then I'll talk about different tools in FME Flow that can help you employ those best practices. The first best practice is to use FME Flow's authentication services. Single sign-on is going to allow for centralized identity management, meaning there will be fewer sources of truth for accounts and permissions, and multi-factor authentication can be turned on through identity providers as well, giving you an additional layer of security. Next, we recommend using role-based access control to avoid individual user permissions that are difficult to monitor and manage. Each user should have at least one role, and the roles on the right in this slide here are the default roles that come with FME Flow, but you can make your own to suit your organization's needs. Oops, sorry. I want to stay here for a little longer. When assigning roles, we recommend using the principle of least privilege. Only give users exactly what they need to perform to their tasks. If they might need a role in the future, assign it to them when that time comes. And if a user no longer needs a role, unassign it for tighter permissions control. Next, instead of giving multiple individual users admin privileges, consider having dedicated admin accounts that only necessary people have access to. So lastly, identifying security threats to your users is also important. I'll touch more on this in a moment, but you can monitor FME Flow's logs to identify untrustworthy IP addresses accessing Flow and potential brute force attacks. Make sure to regularly review users, roles, and policies with your security team to make sure permissions are current and that your organization's configuration meets your security standards. FME Flow has a variety of tools to help you implement these user management best practices. So first we have our log files. These are going to show SAML responses from the identity provider, or IDP, IP addresses accessing the web UI, successful logins, and more. Next, we have system events. Mark is going to dive into these in more detail later, but these can kick off automations when users try to log in or when they're created, removed, or edited. And lastly, we have our REST API. Version 4 of our REST API has a lot of helpful endpoints to help you manage accounts, roles, SSO, and more. So for my first demo, I'm going to show you how we can sync a SAML user's permissions in FME Flow with their application permissions in the SAML identity provider. By using a system event, the SAML log, and the REST API, we can go beyond the limitation of only a single role getting assigned to SAML users, which is going to make fully implementing role-based access control much easier. Best of all, these updates won't require any manual intervention. So let's go into the demo. I'm going to start here on the user management page. So you can see a user called FME Expert. This is a user that has the FME guest role. And if we look here in the IDP, you can actually see that the user should have the FME admin role. And so the next time they log into FME Flow, I want this role to be updated to accurately reflect what the IDP states that user should have. So to make this happen, I'm going to come back to Flow here, and I'm going to use an automation to do the heavy lifting. So this automation is called Update SAML Roles on Login, and it's very simple. It starts with a system event, and then it runs a workspace. The system event is login successful. So every time a user logs in, it's going to trigger this automation, and then it's going to run a workspace. And the workspace is going to pull in which user logged in and when they logged in. So you can see the parameters here. And it's also going to grab the SAML log from FME Flow so that it can read the SAML response. And I can show you a little bit more as to what exactly this workspace is doing. Let me pull this up. So first, when the user logs in, we're going to check to see if it's a SAML user. If it is, then we're going to continue on with the rest of the workspace, where we'll grab the SAML log and look at the SAML responses from the IDP. We're going to group the log lines by SAML response and get the latest login for the user so that we can see the roles, the IDP states it has. We're going to compare that to the roles they have in FME Flow. And if there have been any changes in the application rules on the IDP side, we're going to update that. So let's turn this automation on. And now my next step is to log in as FME expert with SAML. Okay, so I'm logged in. If I come back here to the automation, I'm going to refresh this page, and you can see that it successfully ran. And when we go back to the user management page and refresh this, you can see that the role FME expert has changes from FME guest to FME admin. So now it's accurately reflecting what's in the IDP side. Okay, so that concludes my first demo. And here are the specific REST API endpoints I used for that demo. You can see I made heavy use of the accounts endpoint to update the roles. For my next demo, I'm going to show you how to take an LDAP account and automatically migrate its roles and objects to a SAML account the first time that user logs in with SAML. This uses a system event and the REST API to make migrating from LDAP to SAML much easier. So let's go into the second demo. Okay, so I'm starting back here on the user management page. Again, we're looking at the FME expert user, but this time it is an LDAP type user. And the organization in this case has just switched from an LDAP IDP to SAML. And so when a user logs in with SAML for the first time, we want to transfer or migrate FME experts' roles, permissions, items, etc., over to the new SAML account. And so there are a few things I want to migrate over today for this demo. The first is going to be the roles. So again, this one's going to have FME author this time. And then I also have a couple objects I want to move over, two automations. One is called Run Sample Workspace Enabled. And as the name might imply, this automation has been started. And then there's Run Sample Workspace Disabled. And this automation has not been started. When we do that migration, I want to make sure that the enabled workspace is still running, just to keep everything going smoothly. So we're going to have another automation do the heavy lifting. Very similar format to the first demo, very simple, just a FME Flow system event when a user logs in, and then it's going to run a workspace. And that workspace is going to take the user login information. And we're not going to use the SAML log this time. We're just going to use the REST API to move that old LDAP account information over to the SAML account. So here's the workspace. First, I'm going to check to see if the user is a SAML user. And if so, we're also going to check to see if there's a corresponding LDAP account that still exists for this user in FME Flow. If so, the migration hasn't been completed yet. So then we're going to transfer all the information from the LDAP account to the SAML account. We're grabbing permissions, items, and roles. We're also going to get the LDAP user's enabled automations so that when we delete the LDAP user and move everything over, we can re-enable those automations after the migration to make sure everything is still running smoothly. So I'll come back here, and this automation is actually already started. So my next step is just to log in as FME expert with SAML for the first time to perform that migration. Okay, so I've logged in. If I go back to Flow and go to the user management page, let's refresh this and see what happened. Okay, so we still have an FME expert role, user, but as you can see, the username is different. And this is because the LDAP and SAML users briefly exist at the same time, so they can't have the exact same username. That has to be a unique field. So instead, I've used FME expert's email address as their username for their new SAML account. That makes sure everything moves over correctly. And you can see the roles have been moved over. So FME author is this role now. And back here in the automations, when I refresh this page, you can see the owner has also been updated to FME expert at safe.com, which is the new SAML user. and the run sample workspace that needed to be enabled is actually enabled. So that concludes the second demo. Here are the REST API endpoints that I used for that second demo. Again, I'm really making use of that accounts endpoint for the migration, and I'm also using the automations endpoint to identify and enable those transferred automations. Okay, so that concludes the user management section. Now I'll pass it off to Mark.
All right, thanks, Naya. Yeah, we're going to talk about system events now. We had a sneak peek of it just then, but we're just going to dive into some other examples in the higher level of why you would want to use system events more. So as most of you are probably accustomed to, your FME Flow environments have a lot of changes that happen there. There's a lot of users interacting with it, a lot of different items and moving parts going on, and that can be a bit of a challenge. So what type of challenges are involved here? You may have found yourself asking questions like who changed what and when, or something like something broke and needs attention, but you weren't notified. So these types of manual audit trails and keeping track of all these things, especially when it's manual, is very time consuming and inconsistent. And as we saw in the poll earlier, about half of us are doing these types of work manually. And the risk associated with this is extra overhead with just administering and trying to manage your instance. This can be a bit of a scalability issue too, because as your instance grows and your user base grows, that means a lot more moving parts are on your instance. There can also be staff dependence or specific knowledge about very specific things. There may be unintended duplication or loss of items when a lot of things are going on at the same time, and even extended outages because maybe you didn't know that something was out. So what if FME Flow could manage itself? So we kind of talked about this just before, but all the tools are there. If you combine the power of system events in automations with the trigger for specific types of system events, combining it with the Flow REST API, you're able to do a lot of automated management and more responsive management of your instance instead of you needing to manually monitor for specific things to happen. So the example we're going to go through is auto-updating permissions on new items, specifically new database connections. The goal here is because database connections and their permissions are not shared by default. When you publish a new database connection, it's only shared with you. So that can be a bit of a challenge because maybe you want your connection to be shared widely with other users in your same role or other roles across your Flow instance. So the way to solve this is to use automations, the REST API, and system event monitoring to automatically update those permissions. Now we're going to showcase this in the demo. So you can see in this automation, we start off with that FME Flow system event trigger and monitoring for database connections that are created. And it's running that workspace in response that is going to be referencing that database connection name that is coming from the system event trigger. So that way we can pinpoint which exact database connection is added. So going into the workspace of what is actually happening there, it starts off with a parameter fetcher that pulls the name of that database connection. For example, there's a new one called like PostGIS training database. And we need to make a chain of REST API calls in response, including one where we are getting the events that happened on the Flow instance, specifically database connections that are created. And once that information is pulled and parsed, we're able to get the exact user that is associated with that system event. And we could see that my user is there. We also need to get information about my account to pull the role information. So just getting that background information about my account first. And then we're able to make another REST API call to my user to pull those roles. and parse that out. That way we can automatically share that database connection with those roles that I am assigned to. So looking in the results of that REST API response, we can see that there are 3 roles assigned to me. We've got super user, admin, and full access user. Obviously, you don't want to update super user, but we just want to update the other 2 automatically. So the rest of the workspace is just filtering out to those 2 and then making a final REST API call to update those roles to add that permission to that new database connection, specifically the run and write permissions. So let's say hypothetically, as my user, I'm publishing a new workspace, and in this workspace, it has a new database connection called new PostGIS connection. And once that has been published and it creates that new database connection, we could see on the Flow instance, when we refresh this, we see that it has detected that new event of another database connection being created. And then here, hypothetically, let's say I have a demo user that is assigned to one of those roles. It doesn't have access to the database connections, but when I refresh, we would see that it's been automatically added now that it was published by my other user that shared the same role. So that demo there was just one example of how you can create automatic responses to things that are happening on your Flow instance. The system events is really what's driving it here and with the automations. And there's a variety of events that you can pick from. It's definitely worth checking this out if you haven't looked before to see what type of events you can monitor. And also something else, if you want a specific type of event that you want to be able to monitor, but you don't see it in FME Flow as something that you can monitor, we really suggest posting an idea or even sharing in the chat about something that you want us to be able to monitor. So that's the end of my section, and I will now pass it over to Richard.
Thanks, Mark. This workflow that I'm going to present here is about visualizing relationships, but it ties into the system events because you could have it triggered by a system event if you wanted to, and you could send out particular notifications to particular users. Monitoring the impact of changes and having automated responses can be important. It's really hard to understand maybe all the relationships within your FME. So you don't know what you're affecting if you change a database connection or you're changing workspace. So that's the practice that we want to try to enhance here with this workflow. So again, the goal is to know what you want to change. The problems are you have connections, workspaces, automations, and you have many-to-many relationships in there, and it can be really hard to understand them and see them. But the REST API gives us a good practical point where we can pull in all the dependencies and view them. So this allows us to have better insights into managing your flow. We'll jump into the demo here. So in this demo, I am picking a web connection. This is in real time, picking all the web connections from my instance and displaying them for me. And then it's coming back with all the dependencies of that object. So I have my web connection here, and you can see it's part of all these workspaces in the light blue. And then the green are all the automations it's associated with and schedules. So now I've got a clear mapping of what's there. And it can be useful for users as well as administrators. And all it is a Flow app that I've set up with a data streaming service. And some of the keys here are using dynamic parameters in the workspace. And then I'm pulling in a list of all the current objects in my FME Flow so that I'm up to date and I can pick what I want when I'm doing it. And this concept can be applied to any object in FME, but I've chosen web connections. So here we're reading all the web connections. It's probably a little bit hard to see, but in general, picking web connections, all the workspaces, automations, schedules, merging them together, and then we're finding the object that we want, we're sorting it, and then we're just formatting all the elements into a pretty HTML page. And that is pretty much it for this workflow. It can be adapted any way you want. You can add new objects, like I was saying, and you can have it either run on a system event or on demand. So the main endpoints I use here are dependencies. We have workspaces, repositories, all the other objects, the dynamic parameters, one of the main features here that I was talking about. If you're interested in the dynamic parameters, Mark had a webinar recently on favorite enhancements, and he discusses in more detail how to set up those dynamic parameters. It also makes use of a lot of open API callers. So the next steps, again, trigger with a system event. You could also organize these objects into projects if you wanted to migrate and you don't want to go through the manual process of figuring out what would be a project. You could automate this in a way with a few little rules and create those projects. It could also be useful for finding orphaned objects. If you have a web connection that's not used by any workspaces, probably could be deleted or removed or at least looked into. And you can apply that to anything. So better change management is what we're getting out of this, better auditing. And it can also allow the users when they're publishing to have more confidence that they won't break anything downstream. If they get a report of all the related objects, they can go check them and make sure that nothing else is being affected. For my second demo here, I'm going to talk about job quality assurance. So we're going to go beyond success and failure. We have those metrics. You can see them. You can be notified by them. They're pretty clear to see. But we want to look into the quality of the work of the job and make sure it's consistent. So the goal here is to create your own metrics and to measure against those metrics. Find out what matters to you. We can alter this in many different ways. I'm looking at features in, features out, and time. And then we can store the data in a little light database and update it on the go as it runs. So this allows us to have consistent results. It also allows us, if we're migrating to a new version, to be able to make sure that we're within the same parameters as the old version, not just success and failure, but we're writing the same amount of jobs. We'll jump into the demo here. So in here, I have a little SQL-like database where I'm storing all my statistics. And then I've got a dashboard that is being created from a workspace that's run on a schedule. And then I can view this dashboard under the jobs here. And here I've got 2 standard deviations for this workspace. And then I can see that this one was below it. It notified me, put it into this report. You could have it emailed or use any other notification. But it's kind of nice to have a graphic here to understand what went wrong or potentially what you could do better. So you can have flexible variations in here. You can choose 1 standard deviation or 2 standard, and it's up to you what you want to measure. So this is the workspace here. We're just reading the SQLite database, and then I've got a little section on here. If it's the first run, create a new object here. And then we're moving through grabbing the features, essentially. So we have 3 main components here. We're grabbing the features written, features read, and then the timestamps to see how long it ran. But what I'm doing with these features read is I'm reading based upon a filter. So you can filter for feature type and read all the different feature types and have those output to a database. You can actually look at transformers and look at the output of transformers and record those statistics too. So that way you can get a full picture of your workflow and make sure that you're keeping it on track. And then, yeah, we're merging them, writing it back out, updating the statistics, and then creating this HTML report again. All right, so the main endpoints, again, are the parse job log, so I can pull out the relevant information. And then the other jobs that I want to pull out, there's more statistics on those. So the big benefits here is going beyond success and failure. You've got a lot of customization. This one looks at readers and writers, and total feature counts. Feature type counts, I think, is a benefit too. If you're using a feature writer, it's also going to grab any information from there for your feature counts. So it's pretty complete. And then in terms of customization, you could grab those flags of low memory conditions. You can change your thresholds. You can capture warnings from transformers to indicate poor data quality. Potentially, you have a validation process, and if it's catching more than the average, you want to flag that to say, hey, the data quality coming in is worse. You can use loggers and gather whatever you want and measure it. That's it for my section. I'm going to pass it off to Dylan for his custom MCP integrations.
All right, so we're going to have a little bit of fun and play with some AI. So at this point, we might have a great set of tools at our disposal, but they can be spread over our environment as endpoints or workspaces. We might know what data we want, but we might not know where to find it or which tools to use. We might lack the knowledge of how to use the tools available or what they even do. The tools we have might have multiple configuration steps, be prone to misconfiguration. Maybe a syntax error causes a workflow to fail and we have to reconfigure it from the beginning. So it can get pretty overwhelming. So this is where MCP can help us. So what is MCP? MCP stands for Model Context Protocol. It was recently developed by Anthropic, and it's an open protocol that standardizes how AI applications discover, integrate with, and interact with external tools and data sources. Now, because it's becoming an industry standard, we can leverage existing clients to interact with an MCP server toolset, or we can create our own. And just to show how simple these can be, on the right here, I have a completely functioning MCP server with a single tool. So if I wanted to, we could use this in something like Claude Desktop. All we would need to do is update the configuration file with the path to its location. Claude would then be able to access the tool, and I could ask it to add any two integers together. Now, I won't go into how to configure this. There's a ton of resources online on how to get started, and it's a lot of flexibility as well. So let's take a closer example with FME. Now, say I wanted to create a queue in my FME Flow environment. I would send a request to the AI to create the queue. It looks at its categories of tools, looks at their names, descriptions, the schema, to see which one would work best for the user's request. Now in the back end, all these tools are building API requests, primarily using the REST v4 API. Once the AI decides on a tool, it needs to determine the parameters that need to be populated. And we can kind of visualize the AI seeing the request this way now. A tool request is made. Parameters 1 and 2 are explicitly defined. So this tool takes a priority and a name. And parameter 3, the description, is not explicitly defined, but through the context, the AI knows this is already a description. And so it's going to assign that to that parameter. So this information is sent through a REST v4 post request to the queue's endpoint. That queue is created in FME Flow, and then the AI lets us know that it's finished processing our request. So just before we jump into the demo, to recap, our goal here is to use natural language to monitor and administrate FME Flow. The reason we want to do this is because manual processes can be tedious and existing workflows may not be well organized. We'll solve this problem by using MCP pools that leverage FME's various APIs. So we'll touch on a little bit of data virtualization too. As a result, we'll get fast and efficient administration of FME Flow. So with that, we'll jump into the demo. All right, so I'm in FME Flow. On the right here, I have Claude Desktop open on the right, connected to my MCP toolset. Now, this is the easiest way to get started with using MCP tools, using an existing client. So I'm going to take a random job ID from my jobs page, but we can imagine receiving a job ID from an automation that sends us an email about a job that's failed or has finished. Now, job logs can be really long. Maybe I don't want to sift through 20 pages to get the information I want. Instead, I can just directly specify the information I'm looking for. Once this query is sent off, you'll see it's using a tool called FME Flow job log. And that's just using that REST v4 API endpoint. The API responds with the information I asked for, and it's even converting kilobytes to megabytes with a nice little explanation. So we can do things like that too. So using Cloud Desktop is great, but maybe I want more customization. So I created my own chat client in Workspace. This gives me access to multiple different models. In our early example, I went through creating a queue. Now that we have that queue, maybe I want to add engines to it, but I don't know how. Maybe I'm new to the system or I'm new to FME administration. And so luckily, I can just ask Gemini in this case to give me more information about how to do that. So I'll just ask, how do I assign engines to a queue? Pretty straightforward question. Gemini returns me a nice detailed set of instructions. First, it's saying, use a different tool. Just list the FME Flow engines, see which ones are available. Then you can use the Create FME Flow Engine tool. It tells me which parameters I need, which ones are required, which are optional, and what these parameters mean. Now, you'll notice here, I don't actually have to specify the tool. I can just simply ask what engines are available because of our context window. It kind of knows we're already talking about this. So I'll ask Gemini to assign localhost engines 4 and 5 to the variant form jobs queue. I want the rule to be enabled, and I'm just going to call it very important jobs rules for simplicity. So I get confirmation that's been done. Now, always good to double check, so I'll just refresh the page. And we can see that those engines have been assigned, our name's correct, and the rule's enabled, so everything looks like it should. So as we've seen, AI can be super helpful for pulling information from the FME Flow environment. Here, I'm going to use the metrics job count endpoint to get the number of jobs run in the data virtualization queue within the last 4 hours by the hour. So I get the answer I'm looking for, but it's not formatted very great. Gemini 2.0 is pretty old now, and it's actually being retired at the end of March. So I'm going to use a more advanced model. And these more advanced models typically take a longer time, but the quality result is typically much better. So using ChatGPT 5.1, I get a nice table with some additional statistics I didn't even ask for. So advanced models can do more. This can be good and bad. And this is kind of where you want to shore up your system prompt. So now I want to visualize these results. So I'm just going to ask, can I get a bar chart? Now, I know I have a tool for this, but GPT 5.1 is pretty powerful, so it's going to try and do this itself. And maybe this is okay, and maybe this fits your needs. But I have an MCP tool that uses data virtualization that uses the same endpoint, but uses a chart generator to chart those results and send it back to the chat. So I'm going to say use the MCP tool. It knows which one I'm talking about because we're talking about metrics, job counts. And so that runs my workspace and I get my chart back. Now in the workspace logic, I can specify if I want a bar chart or if I want a pie chart. So with data virtualization, we can extend the functionality of existing endpoints, or we can create whole new tools that don't exist. And so there's our pie chart. Now it's running on schedule, so those pie slices are all the same. But let's take a quick look at the workspace. So using that job count endpoint, I've just added a couple more parameters so I can get my graphing that goes through a chart generator. So there's all our statistics. And these statistics go to the chart generator. And there's the same kind of one we saw there. That is being formatted as a PNG and then being sent back to our chat client and displayed in the window there. So obviously a lot of flexibility here, and our options are really limitless. So that concludes the demo. Now, what are some benefits? Well, it's a one-stop shop. All our tools, metadata, they're all in one place. We can ask pretty intuitive questions about our system. We can use any existing REST endpoint. We can extend the functionality of existing endpoints, or we can create new ones all together with data virtualization. Now, I can use natural language, and I can use any language. So AI doesn't care if I'm speaking French, Russian, Japanese. It does not care. We'll get the same results. And it's highly customizable. So that brings us to the end of our webinar. Just to go over some key points we talked about today. Governance scales through automation, not effort. FME Flow provides the APIs and tools you need. So a lot of great options out there. Proactive administration reduces risk and workload. Now, I hope this has given you some great inspiration and insight to take your administration to the next level. And with that, I'll pass it off to Elizabeth.
Amazing. Thank you, Dylan. Yeah, so just a quick reminder, we will have a question period in about 3 minutes time. So if you do have any other questions top of mind for our presenting team based on today's content, just a reminder to get those into the questions tab. If you are newer to SAFE software, just to point out a few things, we've been in the data integration game for over 30 years now, working with over 200,000 users across the world. FME is the only all data NEI platform, so we work with all data velocities, locations, types, and any AI technology, as we saw many examples of today. We also do have a couple key resources to share with you. A handy way to navigate through any resources linked in the whole deck, for that matter, is to click the download button on the top right, and you can navigate through those links directly, but we do have a Getting Started with Data Virtualization page if you're interested to learn more about that specifically, as well as Getting Started with FME Flow REST API. At SAFE, we are all about free resources. We are home to our academy, which is instructor-led training, completely free of charge. And then, of course, our shameless plug for our webinars page, safe.com/webinars. We have lots and lots on demand. I think over 400. I counted the other day. Saw the full tally there. And then we also have a lot that have just been posted, quite a handful rather, coming up this spring. So definitely check those out, register for what you might be interested in. Next steps to take here today, I always like to plug that you can always get in touch with us no matter what your level of FME is. We'd love to help you with any data challenge, info@safe.com, and then our accelerator course. So if you're newer to FME, it's a great place to learn the basics. It's 90 minutes and completely free of charge. Claim your community badge. So if you are a member of our community and you'd like to redeem these badge codes as a thank you for joining us today, I will drop that link in the chat. And if you are new to the community or if you haven't heard of it before, it is a great place to network with other users alike. FME experts also hang out in there. It's a great forum opportunity to ask any questions that you might have. Okay, and with that, I will invite the team back on stage with me here now. And we can take a look through the questions that came in together. I know we did get to several of them as we went along here, but it looks like we've got, yeah, a good handful. And of course, anyone feel welcome to keep dropping more in as well. We've got over 10 minutes here.
One of the questions was around system events, and yeah, there is an endpoint for system events. So you can take those system events and store them, which might be a good idea because by default, they're cleaned up every week. So if you want an audit trail, that endpoint can be very helpful.
Awesome. Maybe while the team's picking out the next question, I'll just highlight, we did get a couple of questions about workspaces being shared. And I just wanted to note that when you get that webinar follow-up email, either later today or tomorrow, just click into the link there to take you to the webinar resources, and you'll see everything on that one webinar page, the recording, the slides, as well as the workspace files that you can download and test out yourself.
Seeing a question come in.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
All right, I can go. So I'm seeing a question come in. What would be the advantage of managing groups with LDAP SAML versus groups directly inside FME Flow? So this is a question about why would you use application permissions from the identity provider instead of just doing user management directly in FME? And my answer to that would just be consolidation. So if you're managing it on the IDP level, then there's not really two sources of truth. If you're taking roles from the IDP, it's easier to reference that outside of the FME Flow to know what users have what permissions within it. Certainly, organizations can do either or, but it tends to be a little easier to just see what's going on from outside of FME Flow if you're doing it at the IDP level.
I'll answer that question about how do we connect the MCP server to FME Flow. So the server.py file, all that we're really doing in there is calling a Python function to send an HTTP request using one of the REST-v4 API endpoints. So it would be a similar function as if you were to do it manually, but AI is just triggering those. So it's just a Python file that runs like locally on your computer, but the AI is inserting those parameters and then triggering it instead of you doing it manually.
I think one thing also to bring up is if you're new to FME Flow's REST API, we have an article on the knowledge base for that. So I'm just going to post that in the chat right now. So if you want to understand how we were leveraging that across our demos today, definitely check out the article. And on your own Flow instance, if you go to the top right at the question mark, there is a link to the REST API on your own instance, so you can see all the endpoints and try it out yourself.
I see another question around managing web connections. What's best practice on that? So yes, users can create their own connections, but often it's best if you have administrators in charge of those web connections, and that's so you don't have multiple duplicate web connections up there. So you can use your own on desktop, and then when you want to push it up to FME Flow, you ask the administrator to create it. You could also be an account up there that would have higher permissions potentially that the user wouldn't have. So that's how we see larger organizations often manage their web connections.
Excellent. Looks like we've gotten to most now that have come in so far anyway. Any others that the team sees we might want to elaborate on or pull out? Maybe while they're taking a final scan, I'll just chime in to say, it looks like we're having some issues with the webinar community badge code. Thanks for the few in the chat who let me know about that. I will investigate on the back end, and if we don't solve it in the next couple of minutes, I will include in the webinar follow-up email that you can now redeem it with a reminder of what the code was again, once we get that sorted. Okay, yeah, anything else? Just final call from the team. Any other questions, or are we all good to wrap up?
Yeah, there's just one question about AI assist here. I think we'll have to follow up on that one, just get a little bit more information.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, we can definitely follow up with German there. Okay, well, with that, if you do have any questions, feel free, if they come to mind in the next few minutes, feel free to drop them into the questions tab there. I will leave things running for a few more minutes, and we'll be able to follow up with anything, like Dylan said, that we weren't able to get to live here today. But in the meantime, thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time to join us, and a huge thank you to our team of 4 presenters for taking the time to produce and present today's content. We really appreciate it, and we hope you all have a great rest of your day. If you do have a moment to fill out our webinar survey, we really appreciate any feedback. It's just a couple multiple choice questions there. Thanks, everyone, and bye for now. We'll see you on the next one.